Well, one of great pride that the Attorney General has pulled together such a comprehensive approach. We need to remind ourselves periodically the incredible capabilities, the integrity, the courage of the Drug Enforcement Administration. All of law enforcement's involved in it, from county sheriff's departments to city police efforts. But at the top of the defensive mechanism of the United States is the DEA, and it is incredibly dangerous work. The people they're confronting actually have power equivalent to a state government. In Mexico, the drug cartels operate in battalion-sized units. They have anti-aircraft guns. They have successfully confronted the Mexican army and run them out of town in major battles. So this is not, people pushing pot in downtown LA. These people are a major threat to Mexican sovereignty, never mind the security of the United States. So I'm glad to see the Attorney General facing up to it. And it's going to require resources. We have to stand behind our state and local law enforcement agencies in the border. Now, he also mentioned drug prevention and rehabilitation. We've gone soft on the drug issue. We're tolerant of it. We are not anywhere near the capability in drug treatment that's required. Who knows? There's probably 18 million Americans out of 330 million who have a chronic substance abuse problem. And we got to face up to that and deal with it. They're a continuing source of crime, of workplace violence, of family destruction. And we need a drug prevention message. A lot of these kids getting killed, admittedly, are poisoned by pills that they have no idea fentanyl's involved. But we've been way too tolerant of a drug culture in the United States, which is growing.
And Gabe, all of this to the advantage of these cartels in Mexico, which, as the general is pointing out, these aren't, corner neighborhood drug pushers. These are multi-global corporations that are rooted in blood and violence and the destruction. Just under the years of Andrés Manuel López Obrador in Mexico, more than 100,000 Mexicans have been killed.
Yeah, that's right, Jose. And, the Attorney General mentioned that El Chapo's sons are part of this sweeping indictment. And as you said, these charges really range across the globe from, those that are companies that are involved in China, so the Treasury Department announcing sanctions against some of those, and also a broker in Guatemala, and also arms dealers here in the U.S. But something that I also found interesting, Jose, and it speaks to the challenge of fighting illegal drug trafficking. According to the Attorney General, only 8 suspects are in custody at this point, and as we understand, and with that news conference still going on, some of these charges, they're still looking for some of those suspects. Can be very, very tough to do, if not impossible, given the logistical challenges really with this global drug trade. But again, those the breaking developments of those charges against the Sinaloa cartels, and some of those stats, Jose, just so difficult to hear. 196 Americans dying from fentanyl overdoses in the U.S. each day, a huge problem.
It is indeed. And El Chapo's sons, the 3 Chapitos, Ovidio, Ivan, and Alfredo, are on the target of the United States. But officially, El Chapo has 15 sons, official count. Mm-hmm. So that family business has a lot of growth potential. Gabe Gutierrez and General McCaffrey, thank you very much. And General, please stay with us, because up next we're going to talk about what we're learning about the suspected leaker of top secret intelligence documents. We'll tell you what just happened earlier today in court and a whole lot more. Please stay with us. You're watching Jose Diaz-Balart Reports on MSNBC.
With Verizon, you can now get a private 5G network.
Based on what you've released them, they're not really charge him with an espionage violation, but rather violating his security and disseminating these defense documents, which in and of itself is an act of espionage.
So, General, last time we spoke, not just a little while ago, but just a couple of days ago, you called it, you said exactly what it is. How can an airman in the Massachusetts National Guard have access to such highly sensitive information?
Well, that's the main question, isn't it? Clearly, this young man has done serious damage to the Ukrainian defense of their country, although I think tactically they can probably mitigate that damage. He's told the Russians how thoroughly we've penetrated their political and military systems. They'll now start turning off those sources of information. So he's done a major damage. But the bigger question, Jose, we just listened to that terrific Air Force One-star in the Pentagon saying we have stringent guidelines in place. That's nonsense. We've had a series of releases of classified information, Snowden, Chelsea Manning, you name it, where low-level people could download the history of U.S. diplomatic cables. Why would the Massachusetts National Guard have access to CIA, NRO, satellite information, briefings for the chairman of the JCS? It's nonsense. There is no such thing as a computer network that cannot be penetrated given enough time and cleverness. So we just have got to relook at a zero-based analysis. How do we handle classified information? Who has access? We used to have all this sensitive information behind the green door. There were two-man control systems. There were personal reliability programs. We got to go back and relook how we're protecting the nation's secret. This is a major blow to U.S. credibility and national security.
And I'm just thinking how many hundreds of thousands, maybe 1 million people in our country have access through clearance to all kinds of sensitive information. I'm just wondering, General, so it happens over and over again. You're saying it's nonsense. Who's defending this?
Well, we have an elaborate, well-funded structure of counterintelligence and computer security, cybersecurity. We understand that the principal threat we thought was China and to a lesser extent Russia, the Iranians and North Koreans using cyber techniques to penetrate our systems. But increasingly over time, we found that the younger generation with their global chat networks and their distrust of government has been the principal source of losing control of its information. Our State Department, the ambassadors now, are fearful of sending a cable to Washington with explicit comment on the state of politics in the global community, because they know it might get leaked 5 years later. So again, I think part of the problem is we've opened the green door. It's distributed intelligence. We got to go back and have probably an outside agency go take a look at Department of Defense and the State Department, equally bad, and say, who are we granting access? It's one thing to have a top secret clearance. It's another thing to have a top secret compartmented clearance. But who needs access needs to be the guideline, and we've lost control of it.
Yeah, I mean, just thinking of state and DOD, I mean, Ana Belén Montes, a spy working for the Castro regime inside Washington, D.C., spent many years in prison, just released recently. But David, members of this online groups have said that he was doing this to impress them. What role did motivation likely play in charges, for example, he may be facing?
Not necessarily the charges, but certainly enhancements under the guidelines for his abuse of his position of trust are going to add additional points to the guideline sentence the judge is going to consider. And by doing this, these other people will testify, perhaps, and certainly if necessary, that he knew exactly what he was doing. This is not a mistake. This is, oh, I didn't realize these were classified, who I was disseminating them to. It becomes part of a much stronger case against him.
Kristen Walker, Ron Allen, General Barry McCaffrey, and David Weinstein, I thank you all very much for being with us this morning. Up next, we'll expand on our conversation about this massive leak of intelligence documents. We're going to talk to Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy, who sits on the Intelligence Committee. Congressman, it's a pleasure to see you. We'll chat in just a couple of minutes. You're watching Jose Diaz-Balart Reports.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
With us now is Illinois Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy, who sits on the Intelligence and Oversight Committee. Congressman, it's always a pleasure to see you. I thank you for being with us this morning. I want to begin by getting your thoughts on the arrest of this suspected leaker.
I'm glad that he was arrested. I'm glad that hopefully we're getting to the bottom of how this happened. But I got to tell you that people like myself are waiting for the classified hearing next week, at which we're going to ask pretty tough questions of the Pentagon and others as to how this possibly could have happened. You know, we spend billions and billions of dollars collecting these secrets and preserving these secrets. And so for a 21-year-old to be able to access them, print them out, and then share them with a bunch of his teenage friends is just mystifying.
Well, so what are the top questions that you're going to be asking?
Well, I think that to me, there are way too many people who have access to these secrets and to these classified documents. And then secondly, I think that the manner in which they have access is just way too easy for them to share with others. You know, one of the reasons why there aren't too many members of Congress who are tied up with a lot of these classified document scandals is that we are only allowed to view them in classified spaces. We're only allowed to view hard copies, not electronic versions. And we're required to turn them back in the moment that we're done reading them. And yet here we have a 21-year-old National Guardsman who has electronic access to all manner of subjects involving classified material. And is it any wonder that he would be able to print them and then upload them onto some random server somewhere? This is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking if he was able to do it in one server and eventually got caught because apparently some of the people in that group put it on another group and that started disseminating, I'm wondering, could there be other areas of the internet, other chats where this kind of stuff is happening and they're not leaking out yet?
That's exactly right. I think that I'm hopeful that this was an isolated instance, but we can't just be confident about that. And so that's why I think it's going to be super important for the counterintelligence folks at the FBI and DOJ, as well as the Pentagon, to get to the bottom of exactly whether any other documents were leaked and how to mitigate any damage stemming from them, as well as the damage that came out of this initial leak.
And then, of course, there's the issue of how do you balance security with people's right to privacy?
Sure. Obviously, in this particular instance, many of these secrets were collected on foreign targets. And I think that, I'm hopeful that the damage isn't as extensive as that we fear. But certainly with regard to Americans, I'm hopeful that we're not collecting on them in any way incidental to what's been collected on these foreigners. And God forbid that material gets leaked as well, and there could be further damage.
Congressman, I want to ask you about something else in the news. ProPublica reports billionaire Republican donor Harlan Crow bought property from Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas back in 2014 for more than $133,000, but Thomas didn't report it, even though a federal disclosure law requires officials to disclose the details of most real estate sales over $1,000. Are you and your colleagues at all having conversations about some form of congressional oversight or ethics reform for Supreme Court justices?
Yes, this comes up fairly often, and now I think the drumbeat is going to be louder and louder because first of all, even within the judiciary, it appears that there are different standards that apply to Supreme Court justices versus lower level judges in this sense, which is the Supreme Court justices need to disclose when they receive gifts. And in this case, Justice Thomas didn't even bother doing that. But for lower level justices, they're not judges, they're not even allowed to receive gifts above a certain amount. And yet Supreme Court justices are. And so I think that that's one big discrepancy that needs to be addressed. Just so you know, with regard to legislative branch officials and members of Congress, we're not allowed to receive gifts above, I believe it's $50. I forgot the exact threshold amount. And so I think that that's a fundamental issue that we have to deal with, because I think people are just going to question the integrity of the judgments and the opinions that are rendered by Justice Thomas and others. What did Harlan Crow or his associates get in return for these lavish gifts? There might have been millions of dollars worth of luxury yacht cruises, plane trips, vacations. And it wasn't just Harlan Crow going on these vacations. A coterie of apparently advocates, lobbyists, lawyers for different interests with matters before the court also went along on these trips.
Congressman Krishnamurthy, I thank you very much for being with us this morning. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
The Justice Department is not